you run a large NFP the same way that you run a large business. And in many ways, it can be a little bit more complicated because of the wide variety of stakeholders. There isn't that shareholder value prominence that you might see in a private company or a listed company. And of course, those companies are growing their stakeholder groups too. But in NFP, it's wide, varied, and everyone's very passionate too. So I found it a really appealing place to go.
Before we get started, the team here at the Coast and Commerce podcast want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where this podcast is created, the Kabi Kabi and Jinnabara people. We honour their rich culture of storytelling as we share the inspiring stories of business leaders across the Sunshine Coast. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Let's get on with the show. G'day and welcome back to the Coast and Commerce podcast. I'm Ben Amos from Innovate Media. And on this show, we bring inspiring business leaders from the Sunshine Coast to help you in whatever you do in business. And one of those business leaders we've got here is James Blevin, CEO of Youturn. Now, you may not have heard of Youturn here on the coast, but keep listening or keep watching because today's episode is going to open your eyes to both what Youturn do, but also what you can do in business to support community, which is a critical thing to growing businesses. So James, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me, Ben. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so we've known each other for a little while here on the coast through some previous roles and things, but for those that maybe haven't come across you and don't know your story, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your story before we go into the Youturn story, if that's okay. So what brought you to the coast? Have you been here all your life? And, tell us your story.
Thanks, Ben. Like I say, a pleasure to be here, and thank you for interviewing me. So I was born in Zimbabwe in 1989. Happy to share my age. And we migrated to Australia in 2003 as a family. I've got two younger brothers, and we're all still on the Sunshine Coast. In fact, I've got one brother in Rockhampton. Did my last 3 years of school on the Sunshine Coast. Educated locally. I've done quite a lot of travel, work-related travel with my first employers, which are multinational firms, KPMG and BDO. Great foundation and platform for, I think, a business career. My formal qualification is as a chartered accountant, and working in audit and consulting, you get to see so many different case studies throughout your working life that I think position you well for a life in large companies or in business in general.
Yeah. So tell us about that transition into now working in the not-for-profit space and with Youturn. So what kind of drew you to that role? And now that you've been in the role for, I think, a couple of years, is that correct?
Yeah, I have been. Started acting as CEO in about late April, May of 2023. So coming on 2 years. So probably started, though I'm passionately Australian, I still have a bit of quite a strong connection to my homeland in the form of wildlife conservation. And my wife and I established a charity in 2014. So it's probably the first foray into NFP and getting to understand how it works in this country and just really the power of community, people coming together with a common cause, shared goals. And that's something that continues to this day with that charity on the side. In terms of my career at BDO and KPMG, I did have quite a few NFP clients as well and developed a bit of sector expertise and getting to see the way that different NFPs operate and also the challenge that's coming down from government, from the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission for charities to diversify their income streams, to be more self-sustaining and to lead change as opposed to just rely on block funding and grants. So it's become and has been for a while, dynamic space. And I mentioned just in the intro in talking to you that you run a large NFP the same way that you run a large business. And in many ways, it can be a little bit more complicated because of the wide variety of stakeholders. There isn't that shareholder value prominence that you might see in a private company or a listed company. And of course, those companies are growing their stakeholder groups too. But in NFP, it's wide, varied, and everyone's very passionate too. So I found it a really appealing place to go.
Yeah. So Youturn has been established on the Sunshine Coast or in the Noosa region originally, I think, for 30 years, maybe plus.
Yes.
And focused on, supporting youth of the region in child safety and homelessness and mental health, suicide prevention. Can you give us a little bit of a sense of what is Youturn today? So from its founding, in 30 years ago, to what is Youturn today, and what do you guys do?
Of course, I'll take you through the very quick timeline. You've summarized it really well, Ben. We established in 1989 as a volunteer-led. It was called the Noosa Accommodation Project then, where we supported 5 young people experiencing homelessness.
That was the year you were born. If
yes,
connecting the dots
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So maybe this was destiny for me to end up where I am. And so Noosa Accommodation Project initially, a few name changes, Noosa Youth Service, United Synergies might be one that the Noosa community and parts of the Sunshine Coast community are more familiar with. We had a name change to Youturn in 2020. We also established, and this one's worth mentioning, established the Noosa Suicide Bereavement Project in 2002. That is now known as the Standby Support After Suicide Program, which is a program of Youturn, but it does have its own national identity, and one that started as a local intervention, local unfunded intervention, something that our leaders at the time identified, and that has become nationally significant now, which is a great local story that of course Noosa people are passionate and proud of. I'm sure the Sunshine Coast as well. And that is now funded throughout the country in all 31 primary health networks. That's sort of how we determine whether we're national or not. Mm. And like I say, a program that we deliver in the Northern Territory and New South Wales as Youturn, and then working through implementing partners and large ones in other jurisdictions. So Uniting Care, Anglicare, those ones who might have broader reach into those larger communities and larger states like Western Australia.
And how does Youturn today deliver its services? So what does that service delivery model look like?
Sure, it varies from program to program. It's been one of the things that I've needed to do as a new CEO, is to try and bring an organizational focus to things and build those organizational frameworks, as opposed to what can happen sometimes in NFPs, is that it's quite fiercely programmatic and people are passionate about their programs, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's fantastic to see that passion in our frontline staff, and it's something that we encourage always. But as we grow and the expectations of us rise, it's quite important that our direction is clear, and that we've got clear and consistent frameworks. And we know another thing about enterprise risk management is making sure that what we're doing on the ground is largely consistent with the strategy and the risk appetites that we've set for ourselves as an organization. So it does depend on the programs, but we are going through a strategic planning cycle at the moment, which is a very comprehensive one. We have more than 300 staff now. An internal working group is helping quite strongly with that. And we also seek the input on those, because we are a public interest organization, the input of key stakeholders like the Department of Health, the primary health networks, and our community as well, in the form of surveys. So a little bit of that example of what I talked about before, where our stakeholders are wide and varied. And I know, as I'm sure any leader does, that your strategy is more likely to prevail and succeed if many people feel like they've built it together, which is what we're trying to do.
Yeah. So can you share for those the business community listening who are maybe thinking, where do I see the work of Youturn in the community? Because I think as business people running businesses and with staff and families, in our community here on the Sunshine Coast, I think one of the strengths of the Sunshine Coast is, the community around us. And so how does Youturn show up in the community for the community?
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. I think the Sunshine Coast is one of the strongest communities in the country. Of course, if you live here, you would say that. But I do travel quite widely for my role, and think that the Sunshine Coast, Noosa, is a very special place in terms of commitment to community. And so probably in terms of what you might see as far as Youturn service delivery is concerned, is we run a number of Headspace centres, and Headspace is I hope it needs no introduction, but it supports youth 12 to 25 with moderate to mild presentations. And we run those centres in Bundaberg, Gympie, Bribie Island is a new satellite, Caboolture, Toowoomba, Maroochydore is another, and we also newly have one just announced in South Australia, in Gawler, through the country, South Australia, PHN. So Headspace is one. We have the community centre in Taunton on Ernest Street that some people would be familiar with, and we have the shower facilities, laundry facilities there, our emergency relief, so where people need assistance with groceries, that kind of thing. All of our outreach, a lot of our outreach to community, homelessness outreach is coming out of Taunton. Those staff do work across the Sunshine Coast though as well, so they'll spend time in Maroochydore. Of course, people live in varied locations too. And we are actually in the process of moving, call it our corporate office or our largest office to Maud Street in Nambour, which will hopefully be in April or May this year. So another consultative process, but we run residential child safety programs as well, supported independent living programs. Our philanthropy, we're probably just starting to get into, and for the most part, we're still government grant funded, and to probably the tune of about 89%. And they are large programs and ones that we are good at delivering. So we've established that reputation with our partners, our funders, and keep in close connection and contact with them to continue to innovate those services. So I think that in and of itself is good, but we also know that there's an imperative for us to do a little bit more with what else is available to us in terms of commercial revenue opportunities that we can reinvest back into programs, philanthropy, as you mentioned earlier, and others.
Yeah, excellent. So when we think about the role that business plays and the role that community plays and potentially that symbiosis, like I'm interested in your connection or your thoughts on that, because I think you've played quite heavily both in the world of business, big business in some cases, and local business as well. And you've also now had extensive experience in that community space as well. So where do you see these two coming together?
I really like that word, symbiosis, and maybe in the intro we talked a little bit about those parallels between for-profit and not-for-profit companies. And I think some of that focus is changing. Whilst in the business landscape there might be that focus on shareholder value, I think particularly in a place like the Sunshine Coast, we see owners and managers really focused on their staff as a significant stakeholder group, as well as their customers, but as well as their community. I've seen just in other episodes of this podcast, all of the business owners and particularly for-profit ones talking about the value of a powerful and strong connected community. Probably its link with an organization like Youturn is we'd love to have a mission or a vision along the lines of we won't because it's utopian and unrealistic, but a vision along the lines of eliminating the need for a Youturn to exist, because community has it covered. Community's connected. There is that symbiosis, and it's something that is prominent in our conceptual systems framework and our new strategic thinking is to be more deeply embedded in our communities to facilitate those connections. And it's a feature of the Standby Support After Suicide program. Yes, we provide individual support sessions for people impacted and bereaved by suicide, but we also either directly or through our implementing partners host community capacity building workshops as well. And that isn't solely the remit of NFPs like us. We see businesses doing that all the time, where businesses caring for their staff, investing in, even if it's just the office space or monthly meetings where there might be guest speakers or that sort of thing. I think we start to see that blending between for-profit private companies, listed companies, and of course the NFP sector.
And do you believe the idea that a strong community equals strong business? Like, do you think that it's as direct as that?
Absolutely, I do. I think you look at the needs of a business, and it needs, of course, a staff body. It needs its staff to live in reasonable proximity of the business itself. It needs its customer base. It needs the right operating and policy environment, and of course it's the community that elects the policy makers. So I think it's all intertwined. And I know we talked a little bit about in our introduction that all of these things come together. If there's probably one thing now, and we see it a lot coming through in our headspace centers and indeed lots of our services, that in 2025, it's an age of bombardment, of messaging and different things. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves to simplify, focus on the 20% of things that yield 80% of the outcomes. And I think if we all did that, it's not just leaders. I like to think that everyone is a leader in some way, shape, or form, and carries that responsibility of being a good citizen and a good community member. And if we were all better at consistently prioritizing the 20%, and not to say we're in a bad spot, but we'd be in an even better one. And one that I'd probably call out is our housing situation, that we've been complacent for a long time, and this crisis is 30 years in the making. It's obviously relevant to business owners as much as it is to our sector, where we see so much of the need arising from a social determinant such as secure, stable, affordable housing. And if we can solve that, then we'd see less presentations and less complex and ongoing presentations in our work. And I think that is equally vital for NFP leaders, for business leaders to tackle, and of course our policymakers as well.
So let's speak to the business owners who are completely on board with everything we've been talking about so far. They believe that stronger communities equals stronger business, but they're operating in their business and they're thinking, but what do I do? What can I do in reality, in practicality? Is it as simple as sponsoring a sports team? Is that supporting community? Or is it more than that? Or what can we do?
I think it takes a variety of forms. If I think in our sector, we like to think that we work in partnership with all of our, call them competing providers, but it is quite a competitive landscape in NFP. What we probably should do better is see ourselves as intermediaries and facilitators and partnership builders and that kind of thing. And I think the same applies to the for-profit setting, whether it's a supplier to your company. Like I said, I've talked about the staff relationship, the customer relationship, and it being reciprocal. And of course, community central to that as well. I think people in a community get to grow and respect a company that cares about where it operates, its customers, its staff, and other stakeholders. The other one that we talked about was just how vital it is, I think, for everyone and anyone in a position of prominence or leadership to really engage in the policy environment. And that doesn't mean having an ideological viewpoint or anything like that. I think that means knowing what the right policy settings are. And again, every astute business leader would know what they are and would talk about it. And I think to be sort of long-term future focused as opposed to next 3 years focused. And we see lots of that. I mean, it's why we get such short-term kind of measures coming out of federal election campaigns and things like that. And that's probably the one thing I'd say for all leaders is to have that and trying to adopt the 20-year view as to what the community needs now to look healthier in 20 years' time.
When you think about some of those systemic changes that are probably needed in community to, affect real difference, I think businesses often feel, maybe hamstrung, or that there's only limited things that they can do. Like things that they can do is maybe, like I said, a little bit tongue in cheek, like sponsor a sports team or, gift a donation to a charity auction, like those kinds of things. You feel like you're giving back to community as a business owner. But how much does it really make a difference? And versus those, how can we make real difference on a more systemic level? Do you know what I'm saying?
For sure, absolutely. I think philanthropy and the right philanthropic partners and the larger sort of call them family companies that have a dedicated philanthropy focus are doing precisely this, which is they tend to, there's some intervention or something that might be needed at a systemic level, working with the right partners to facilitate that. And initially it's funded by philanthropy. Where it continues to need to be funded, it then moves into the purview of government. But I think for people who think that government will always lead the way or have that vision about what the future looks like, things like cryptocurrency have taught us that it's not really how it works. Policy tends to follow innovation. So there's absolutely room for business leaders to innovate, and where there is, as far as community is concerned, whereas philanthropy doesn't need to be in the hundreds of thousands. I think it can start with much less than that. And you're right, I think it starts with donations to sports teams and community, that kind of thing. But where there's a dedicated philanthropy strategy, much good can come from that. And I've talked about how it tends to happen with piloting a new intervention, a new program. And sometimes that's It is just systemic. There's actually no direct service delivery. It's about getting different partners to work better together. It might be changing a framework. It might be changing, different settings within, the area you're operating, so that the people who provide those services get a bit of clarity and we can move the needle on key issues. So philanthropy absolutely does that, and call out again that it doesn't need to be millions or hundreds of thousands of millions. It can start with much less than that.
When you think about corporate philanthropy, do you believe that there's good philanthropy and perhaps even bad philanthropy, like, the wrong way to approach it, or businesses getting it wrong?
It's hard to say, and I suppose it's in my interest to say that the intention is always good. What I'd challenge any business leader, business owner to do in seeking to get involved in the philanthropy space is having a clear goal, a clear cause, and then a plan to try and ameliorate or remedy that. And I think it's like anything, having a good direction setter and a plan that you assess annually is key to moving the needle, as you talked about earlier. So I like to think that everyone starts out with good intentions, but absolutely a complex space, and just like running your business, requires quite careful management and the right resourcing.
And for businesses looking to, do more in the philanthropy space or get more involved in community and make a difference, how much of that do you think should be driven from the top versus from the collective of the business? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, another one. I'd say that a good owner, a good leader, really values that participatory approach, and there's a good governance mechanism within the company for good ideas to be shared, escalated, and you see that take a variety of forms. It can be, a company campfire or a company town hall kind of idea. Sometimes there's particular documents that people fill in, or there's like a working group committee that works on different ideas, and if it gets traction and enough sponsorship, then it makes its way through. I think having those mechanisms is really important, and of course there's always the I think the expectation of a board that they're hiring leaders, or if it's an owner, naturally they have this because they've established it themselves. But leaders need vision as well. But I like to think most people, if you're hiring right, most people have visions too. They just need to be aligned. And I think as far as philanthropy goes, and knowing what a company's one thing is in community, it's going to be probably not quite a democratic process, but at least a consensus one that a company arrives at. And maybe it's influenced at different points along the way by prominent leaders in the company, but I think there's tremendous value in having as many people in the organization support it and feel like they've built it as possible.
Yeah. So when you think about businesses trying to make the right decisions in that regard, and maybe bringing their staff on board and having that more collective agreement on where they're going. I think often a lot of these activities feel like they're not moving the needle potentially, right? It feels like you're just throwing things at something and not really making a difference, because you can't make a difference, right?
Yes.
So or maybe challenge that you can't make a difference, but I feel that maybe leads to a bit of fatigue when it comes to, charity, philanthropy and giving in the business space, when ultimately, as a business, playing devil's advocate here, we're ultimately just trying to grow our business, right?
Yes,
Capitalist
absolutely.
kind of approach, right?
Yep.
So what would you say to those business owners that are maybe feeling like, we used to do a bit in this space, we used to get more involved in community, but it didn't do anything, it didn't move the needle, that kind of
for sure
approach?
No, a really good question, Ben. And having spent time, in the for-profit, for-purpose and NFP environment, I absolutely see that you want to know that the contributions you're making are valuable and that they are moving the needle. So, and a lot of the public health data suggests that we aren't, and a lot of that is we operate in a huge ecosystem. And so I go back to this point about policymakers. It's really important that we deal with the upstream effects. The keeping families together, financial pressures, many of which are born out of the cost of housing in this country. Those things. So that's the first thing I'd say is engage in that environment, because the right policy settings, the right taxation environment, all of that will set the platform for the country. And then beyond that, once business owners start to deal with and companies start to deal with charities, and not all charities have the resources to do this, but one like ours does, with more than 300 staff now and a high revenue base, and we need to become one of those companies of always. And so we've got all the right, enterprise risk systems to keep us going. But what we are trying to do at the moment is establish an organizational impact framework that does precisely what you're talking about, which is we can, through measuring systemically a few key indicators, show the impact that we are having. And we do that with a theory of change, where we basically go, we have these inputs and these activities which equal these outputs, these outcomes, and this is the eventual long-term impact. So not all charities have that, and there's definitely a change afoot, where instead of just reporting financial information, as we've done for a long time, and qualitative program information to the Charities Commission, there may come a time, and we hope it's soon, and of course charities like ours leading the way, with establishing what is the impact that we're having. And I think that will be, once that's clear, it will be an easier way for business owners who are seeking to engage in philanthropy and with charity partners to go and do their due diligence. Notwithstanding that, I do find the ACNC portal a fantastic resource. You can search any charity. I think there are more than 60,000 charities listed there. We are in the top 5% of charities by size in the country. So we're always I hope a good, safe one. And our biggest challenge is always just controlling our overheads, which we do really well. But there's a lot of information there. If you were to search Youturn, you'd see some information on our programs and what kinds of programs we run, as well as who our directors are, who our key management personnel are, and also, of course, our financial information, which is all, we're general purpose financial reporting. So a lot more about a charity than you do a private company that doesn't really have to lodge anything, but it's annual return.
Yeah. Look, I think from my perspective as a storyteller at heart, and obviously video marketing plays into this as well, which is not the conversation we're having today, but I need to kind of raise the idea that I think it's the stories that you tell that lead to the longer lasting impact, right? I think often in charities and not-for-profit space is those charities or those organizations that can tell the best real stories, right? To unpack and find those stories of the impact that it's having on the ground. Because I think philanthropically, if you're giving money or time or whatever, sometimes you don't see the impact. But when you feel that and you see that on an individual level, it becomes so much more real. And that one individual story that you might be able to share, the impact that is had on that person's life, can paint a picture of 1,000 other stories that happen without being told. And I think that's critical in this space. But I also think as a business owner, when you are, undertaking these kind of community initiatives, or you're giving philanthropically, sharing that, like finding those stories and sharing them back down throughout the entire organization, I think is often a missed opportunity, because then not only do you feel good as a business owner or a leader, but the rest of your team potentially feel that they're contributing too, just by showing up to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Fantastic point you raise, Ben. And we do try, we know that the human brain's wired in such a way, and that we love to receive stories, and when it can be identified and that's sometimes tricky for us, depending on the work we're doing and the kind of intervention we've had where the person might not want to be identified, but oftentimes we can achieve it through de-identification, or similar facts, but de-identifying the story. And that works really well for us in terms of our stakeholder events that we run, and we always accompany our annual report each year with a stakeholder event. It was very well attended this year up in Noosa. We had more than 100 people there, and it's everyone from local councillors to our partners to local business people, and we'd love for those events eventually to be 500 or 1,000 people, where we can share those stories of impact across all of our service lines. And you're absolutely right, they're a sample, but oftentimes a representative sample of the work that a charity does. Internally, we do a couple of things. We have a fortnightly Youturn yarn, we call it, and that's a time for me. I do a video sort of fortnightly, and it's really just a selfie video, and I hope the authentic nature of it is well received by all the staff, where we get to share exactly that, things occurring and interesting things occurring in different parts of the company, and I guess impactful interventions that we've had that everyone across the company, across the more than 300 staff, gets to know about and tie back into sometimes their own work. Another thing that we do with some of our corporate partners is come to their company town halls, where they are a decentralized workforce of 400 or 500. It's me, sometimes someone in our community and partnerships team, be an agenda item, and we're able to talk a little bit about our partnership, but some of the work that we've done lately to all of their staff. So that's another way that we like to share those stories. And I agree with you entirely. I think that sharing or having a mechanism within companies to share stories is hugely powerful.
Yeah, thank you for that. Look, I know across the Sunshine Coast there are a lot of businesses who are really performing above their weight, or maybe that's the phrase. They're performing above and beyond when it comes to philanthropy and getting involved in community and things like that. And I'm sure you've seen many great initiatives from companies. But are you able to share? I know I'm throwing you on the spot here a little bit, but are you able to share, maybe not naming names of companies, or maybe you're comfortable to, but are you able to share any examples of things that businesses are doing on a regular, consistent, or even annual basis where you feel they're really having an impact in community?
Yeah, of course, and we do have a few, but I think about some local ones, and I won't mention names. I'll leave the annual report for that. But things like just making space available for community events, I think, and consistently, sometimes, especially with smaller charities, that can be a significant impost. So that is powerful in and of itself. Having the expertise and all the donations in kind that a charity might receive, whether it's fitting out a new office, whether it's elements of the job being done for cost, that kind of thing, because there's a lot of practical work that gets done regardless of whether it's an NFP or for-profit. So that appetite is always very strong in the Sunshine Coast. We also are starting to see, and Youturn's got a pretty strong balance sheet, but we're starting to see the emergence of public-private partnerships a little bit more, where there's the coming together of a few key stakeholders, and that could be, this one I will call out. We operate in the community centre in Tewantin via a peppercorn lease with Noosa Council, and that's worth, it's probably a space that's worth $1 million, and that's something that we're able to do because of that support and that partnership with Noosa Council. So public organisation, and that history's been there for a long time, but that is now growing to include others, and where we actually start to see for-profit businesses say, look, we might have a problem with at-risk youth in this community, and we want to know, as a large charity operating in this area, what you're doing about it. That kind of thing is coming through. And and I'm speaking about a live example here, where we'll come up with an intervention, a service model, or a service logic, where we're able to show, if we do this and run these activities, then we should see this, which will lead to this impact. And if we do that well enough, we can show it to parliamentarians, we can show it to for-profit business owners, as well as other government partners, as I've mentioned, to say we can do this together if we'd like to, and also then provides, I suppose, a basis for ongoing philanthropic funding should it be something that's working well. So hopefully a good variety of examples there.
Yeah, some nice inspiration for anyone of business of any size who is tuning in to this episode. If you were to, James, leave our business audience, our business community here on the Sunshine Coast who watch or listen to this episode with one key action or one key takeaway from today's episode, what would that be?
I would say, and we talked, I know, on the phone about this before, and I'd say it'd be to lead with boldness and to really consider the long-term future, the next generation. And a lot of that is how you choose to run your company, how sustainable it is, how you engage and interact in the policy environment, because and we're seeing that happen across the developed world at the moment. It's really important that our settings are right, and if we think it will just be government leading that innovation and change, if it is indeed required, it won't be. In fact, it very much does rely on frontliners. And like our frontliners are delivering child safety services or suicide postvention services, the frontliners in business are doing a myriad for a variety of things, and they all have very important and valued perspectives. So for leaders, I think, to facilitate a mechanism for that to be shared in a really deliberate way, whether I say it's with policymakers or with other business owners, so that you build a collective movement, is vital. So I'd say lead with boldness and consider the long-term future.
Yeah, I love it. And that's something that we can all take action on, because it's just about turning the mirror on ourselves and saying, like, what can we do here within our own organization that sets things up for an impact wider than our organization, right?
Absolutely. And we can have that. I know we don't name names on the show, but we do have some fantastic businesses here on the Sunshine Coast, and anyone who's been to the business awards knows who some of them are. And we do punch above our weight, and it'd be great to see not that it's not already occurring, but a continuation of that, and for us eventually to solve some of those significant crises that we have at a more sort of systemic country level.
I love it. James, just in closing here, this is your chance to talk about Youturn and how our business community can maybe support, get involved, learn more. Like, what would you want to say to that business community to kind of get them on board with what you guys are doing with Youturn across the Sunshine Coast and Australia?
Of course. I'll probably start by saying though we're a national organisation now, we've got our home roots are proudly here on the Sunshine Coast. And if anyone would like to engage with the work that Youturn or Standby Support After Suicide does, or indeed just wants to learn more, I'd welcome an email to me directly. You'll find lots of contact information available on our website as well, which will go through our community and partnerships team. But we have a highly skilled and capable team, and we don't profess to know everything about the interventions we're having and the impact we're making in society. So if you see something or something that could be done, and especially with our involvement, we would welcome the opportunity to hear from you.
I love it. And the best place for people to get in touch with you, is it via the website?
Probably via the website, but my email address is james.blevin@youturn.org.au. I have the fortune. I listened to Matt Common the other day. He was on a podcast and he called emails a grotesque waste of time. And then I read one of the comments saying, actually, he can't say that because he has the fortune of someone else reading his emails and prioritizing them, which is exactly what I have. Very fortunate. But we use the Eisenhower matrix for emails coming through. So if something's urgent and important, it's one that I read. If it can be scheduled, again, it's one that I read. If it can be delegated, it gets delegated. And if it's distraction, it gets deleted.
There's a powerful little productivity nugget for anyone in business right there at the end that you just snuck in.
Yeah, the Eisenhower matrix. I love it.
Very good. James Blevin, thanks for joining me on the show today. This has been really fascinating conversation, hopefully inspiring as well for business leaders out there who are looking to make a bigger impact than just, what they can do within their business.
Great. Thank you very much for having me, Ben.
Awesome. And for you guys watching, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. And of course, if there's anything that's inspired you or that you found valuable in this episode, which there was lots, by the way, then I encourage you to share this episode with someone else in business on the Sunshine Coast who would get value from it. Hit subscribe on YouTube and follow on your podcast players, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Coast and Commerce podcast.